Member for Moncrieff.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to speak on the topic of manufacturing and Labor's National Reconstruction Fund Corporation Bill 2022. And I know a little bit about manufacturing because it runs in my blood, Deputy Speaker. Both my grandfathers, my father, both my brothers all worked at General Motors Holden in the northern suburbs of Adelaide and Elizabeth, where I was brought up. And so, of course, I'm very passionate about the topic of manufacturing, as are those on this side of the chamber and the coalition. We understand the value of manufacturing for our great country, particularly when it comes to our sovereignty. And so we are passionate about manufacturing. We understand the importance of manufacturing. And I think Australians also understand that, Mr Deputy Speaker. They understand how important it is that we rely more on our own nation's capability than on that of others. But I want to contrast what the coalition believes in and delivers versus what the Labor Party promises and fails to implement. The coalition believes in incentivising business and manufacturers, as we've proven time and time again, with lower taxes and much stronger economic credentials. We took corporate tax from 30% to 27.5% and then to 25% in our last term. Lower taxes, Deputy Speaker, that's what the coalition stands for. Not like this Albanese government, who have already had tax hikes for hard-working Australians. During COVID, it was the coalition who held the nation together with JobKeeper, the cash flow boost and many other financial programs and incentives that positioned Australia to bounce back better than any other advanced country around the world, including our $1.3 billion modern manufacturing strategy, which assisted hundreds of manufacturers around the country, including on the Gold Coast and in my electorate of Moncrieff, and many others to grow and thrive so that they could employ more Australians. And this, of course, we've seen with our record lowest unemployment rate when we left office, that the Labor Party inherited. Manufacturing on the Gold Coast particularly is a very large employer, and the segment is actually the third largest employer. It grew to $8.3 billion and currently employs 22,880 people. Now, tourism is a staple. It's a primary industry for the Gold Coast, and it's going gangbusters again. It will no doubt break all records, but it was approaching $6 billion when COVID hit, and it suffered a $2 billion body blow. But manufacturing during COVID grew 22% over the last 5 years and continues at an annual growth rate of 24% on the Gold Coast in textiles, in chemical products, metal products, boat building, glass, food, space and many other segments. And so the coalition's focus was to modernise manufacturing when we were in government. It was on sovereign capability, it was on jobs in medical products, on defence, on food and beverage, on resources, technology and critical minerals processing, which in my own electorate I have a business there that's a $200 million business, minerals technology in Carrara. I took the Prime Minister there when we were in government. It's a successful minerals technology processing plant. Recycling, clean energy and, of course, space. And we do have a space industry on the Gold Coast, and I'll mention Gilmore Space, who I've mentioned many times. Adam Gilmore is a constituent of mine. He's certainly his business, Gilmore Space, is in the electorate of Fadden, the member for Fadden's electorate, but Adam Gilmore is doing great things for space and was a recipient of the Modern Manufacturing Grant. When Labor came to office at the last election, they inherited a country in a strong economic position, as they always do, after the coalition has been in office. As I said, an historic low unemployment rate, the lowest since 1974, the national debt at 34% of GDP. And let's just compare. In the United States, national debt is at 130% of GDP and expected to hit 133% by the end of the year. In the UK, it's at 99.5% of GDP at the end of last year. So what do those opposite do when they inherit a strong economy, when they are faced with out-of-control inflation and a cost of living crisis, interest rates that continue to go up again, in fact 10 increases in 10 meetings of the RBA versus 0 increases in 100 meetings under a coalition government? A long question, but the short answer is, what do? Another question, when they are in charge of the Treasury benches, they add fuel to the inflationary fire.
That's correct.
They issue government bonds, they borrow more money, they increase the debt that COVID forced the country into and push up inflation in the process. And that's what we're seeing. In short, they ruin the Australian economy, and history will repeat itself. Then the Reserve Bank has to increase interest rates, as we've seen again, to curb the inflation beast. And every Australian with a variable interest rate mortgage has to pay for Labor's bad decisions. And 800,000, let's say families, but certainly mortgage holders who will come off this historically low interest rate will have their repayments more than doubled, crippling household budgets. Families are having to make very difficult decisions, and we're not seeing any empathy from the Albanese Labor government for families across Australia who are having to make those really tough decisions, change the menu every night, change the school that their kids are enrolled in, because they simply can't afford. And the minister across the government bench, on the government benches here, is sniggering at my remarks. This is about empathy for Australian families. This is about empathy. It's about empathy for Australian families and the extra bills that they're having to pay, because they're really struggling. They are struggling. 800,000 mortgage holders will have to pay more than double. When inflation is out of control, it affects every Australian at the supermarket, in local cafes, in restaurants, you name it. We all pay more. And this government is making it worse. They use the lines that they're providing cost of living relief without adding to inflation. And that's just simply not the case. In December alone, we saw early childhood education out-of-pocket costs for parents increase by 4.5%. And if that's not an inflationary cost caused by Labor's incoming policies, then what is? What further evidence do we need? Under us, those costs decreased by 4.5% in the election quarter to June 22. Evidence that we know how to make decisions that improve the lives of the economy and improve the lives of Australians through economic measures. It seems that every time Labor is in government, they have terrible luck. Every time they come to government, there's a sudden and dramatic economic crisis. Why? Because they make bad decisions to exacerbate the economic circumstances of the time. The Coalition opposes Labor's NRF because it's another bad decision by Labor that is bad for taxpayers. It's bad for business, it's bad for manufacturers, and it's bad for the economy. It has a poor funding model. Surprise, surprise. The government's funding model has unintended consequences and it's likely to fail. That's why we don't support this bill, not because we don't support manufacturing. And as the minister likes to bandy across the chamber in question time, to say that we don't support manufacturing on this side of the House is utter and absolute rubbish. But because it's another bad economic decision from the Albanese government, we will see the ramifications through the economy. The shift the government is making to the funding model from primarily competitive and non-competitive grants to government acquiring equity and providing loans is likely to have unintended consequences that those opposite are simply not able to grasp as terrible economic managers, with barely an economic degree between them. What we know is that the National Reconstruction Fund bill is the ALP's $15 billion election commitment in manufacturing policy. That's what we know. The fund will be administered by a corporation with an independent board who will deliver funds against an investment mandate set by the government. The design and execution are fraught with issues. I'd like to just outline a few of them. Firstly, the government's telling our manufacturers what they think, what they need, rather than addressing what they actually need. What they need is the government to show leadership on high energy prices, disrupted supply chains and acute labour shortages across our economy. Without addressing these key economic challenges which are holding industry back, government spending is ineffective. It won't address the real problems, and many of my colleagues have outlined those concerns. Secondly, the bill is fiscally irresponsible, delivering funding well in excess of the Coalition's modern manufacturing strategy. An initial $5 billion appropriation is provided upon passage of the bill, but the timing of the remaining $10 billion will not be subject to further parliamentary approval. In fact, similar financial structures to the one underpinning this bill have drawn criticism from the International Monetary Fund, who stated that implementation of below-the-line activity through newly created investment vehicles, such as the NRF, should be phased appropriately, and more broadly, a proliferation of such vehicles should be avoided. It should be avoided, Mr Deputy Speaker. But they're not listening on the other side. They're not listening to manufacturers and they're not listening to the IMF. They're running headlong off into off-budget or below-the-line funding that the IMF has distinctly warned against. In addition, the IMF said that, quote, cost of living support in light of high energy prices should be targeted, aimed at protecting vulnerable households and small, viable firms. That's small family business. That's what the Coalition would do and always does when in government. Support small and family business that is the backbone of our economy and certainly the backbone of the Gold Coast economy in the electorate where I represent. So Labor are carelessly rushing through a total of $45 billion of off-budget spending, and it must be stopped. Thirdly, the bill will create even more lost time for manufacturers. In this broken model, it would take significant time for money to start flowing, whereas that money was already in place under the Modern Manufacturing Fund. The Clean Energy Finance Corporation, on which the NRF is modelled, was established in 2012 and the first investment was only made some 10 months later. Our manufacturers cannot afford to wait that long, particularly with energy prices going through the roof as they are right now. The government announced that the NRF should be up and running by next financial year, but haven't committed to a launch date. And industry feedback suggests that this type of funding mode takes years to get right, and those years will be lost for our manufacturers. Eligibility is another issue, and certain industries might have margins which are too small, or it could be too risky with disrupted supply chains, and many will no doubt miss out, and the fund could become equivalent to a great big white elephant. There's risks to crowding out private investment, and they're very concerning. If there are such great investment opportunities the government will acquire in equity, why hasn't the private sector already taken advantage of these lucrative opportunities when we all know the private sector works at speed light compared to the wheels of government? We must also not overlook the importance of retaining ownership, especially given that many of our manufacturers are family-owned businesses. The bill will stifle innovation at a time when our country needs innovation, as fund beneficiaries will be unlikely to invest in innovation without a guaranteed return. And this funding model does not entertain a failure, an inherent ingredient to innovation. Also, there's an inappropriate ministerial discretion on this bill, which allows the minister to appoint the chair and board members who will oversee the corporation and its funds. The government has already demonstrated in its early appointments that it cannot be trusted to make sensible, non-partisan decisions, and the bill undermines investment certainty in national priorities, with government changing Australia's national manufacturing priorities on a political whim. Now, they are just some of the major concerns that we have with this bill, but instead of supporting industry and jobs, the government has chosen to forge ahead with radical industrial relations legislation, facilitating a spike in industrial disputes and paving a path to thousands of job losses. Let's watch the unemployment rate go up. Instead of dealing with power prices forecast to spike by 56% over the next 2 years, many businesses across the country may be pushed to the brink. This government is focused on bad economic wrecking policy. It's time for the government to deliver inflationary support for industry and put forward a plan to deal with spiralling power prices. And while manufacturers across the country struggle with rising power prices, Labor's focus is making it more difficult for industry to employ and keep workers to grow their business and keep their costs low. Labor's policies are simply not working. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.